This episode is dedicated in memory of Bill Rocco. Bill was active in Schenectady's Stop DWI Victims Impact Panel, on the board of directors of RID, and the Friends of the Bridge Center. In 1998, he was recognized with the Retired Senior Volunteer Program Leadership Award, and in 1995, he was awarded the title of Patroon of the City of Schenectady.
Hi, I'm William Aiken, Vice President of Removal Intoxicated Drivers, and thank you for tuning in to another show of Looking Down the Road. In one of my previous shows, I interviewed Schenectady District Attorney Robert Carney, and he cited some statistics that were just amazing in that the drunk driving issue was totally out of control and in letting drunk drivers scot-free with no consequence. Today's guest has had a stellar career in law enforcement and also working in road safety. He's worn a lot of different hats. He was state treasurer for Stop DWI from 2014 to 2019. He currently is a Stop DWI coordinator for Oswego County. And he has a long, impressive resume that I don't have time to go all into, but welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And, we have a connection is that my mother worked with you back in when she first started RID.
She worked with Oswego County, yes. We had one of the very first victim impact panels in Oswego County, and it was about the same time that she also worked in Albany to get the very first victim impact statement read at a sentencing.
Now that, I talked to, do you know Linda Campion? She had lost her daughter
Yes.
Now, in her case, the judge didn't allow the victim impact panel because he says it was at the discretion of the judge, discretion of the court. So it had to be later mandated. How did that evolve? Because that was in 1989. It's pretty, if I recall.
That would be correct, because the very first victim impact statement that I'm aware of was regarding Sharon Tate. Her mother, Doris Tate, in California, gave a victim impact statement when Charles Manson's associates were trying to get paroled out.
And this was something that was considered controversial at the time.
It was very controversial. So after that, states started accepting it. By 1982, states were passing laws saying that courts needed to consider the victim impact statement. However, it was on penal law cases, criminal cases, and they weren't necessarily looking at DWI and vehicular manslaughter as necessarily being within that realm. And that's where Doris got with Betty Martin and pushed for her to give a victim impact statement for the sentencing after her daughter was killed by a drunk driver. And that is the first recorded victim impact statement related to an actual driving while intoxicated.
Do you recall what the case was that happened in Oswego County? Were they the first one that had that?
Oswego County was not necessarily a statement, but it was the victim impact panel. That they actually brought victims together to sit down as a panel to tell their story, how they lost a loved one, a parent, child, sibling, or spouse, or maybe they were involved in a crash themselves and had lifelong consequences. I don't see much on the history of that other than it's documented that we had it in 1980. What I do recall, and do have the records on, is that when Bert Jansen ran for re-election as city court judge in Oswego for the city in 1993, one of his platforms was that he was going to start a DWI victim impact panel. And in fact, in 1994, he did start one of those panels.
In conjunction with Stop DWI?
No, actually, Don Barrett, who lost his son to a drunk driver in 1984, was a very strong victim advocate with the New York State Sheriff's Association. He came to Oswego County and discussed getting a victim impact going for a countywide basis. And we actually started that in 2000.
Okay, if I could just turn the lens back to you, what was it that interested you about getting a career in law enforcement? Was there an event, or was it someone you knew who was in law enforcement that influenced you to take that path?
When I was in high school, I was majoring in agriculture and living on a dairy farm, looking at that, and then looking at the reality and the small family farm's not making it and you got to do something bigger. I wasn't really looking at running a big farm. I was looking at different career opportunities. I saw law enforcement as an interest, went to college for it. Fresh out of college, I got hired on the sheriff's office as a correction officer. About 3 months on the job, working the midnight shift, I was assigned to booking. And the deputy brought a guy in for drunk driving. Actually, it was much more than that. See, John Ware had been out to a bonfire. They ran out of beer. So John volunteered to go to the store and get more. Even though he'd been drinking excessively, even though he had a prior DWI arrest, nobody tried to stop him. So he went to the store and he loaded cases of beer in the back of his car. He's racing back to the bonfire, and he met the Swam family head on. He killed Mr. Swam. He killed his preschool son, and a preschool nephew died 6 weeks later in the hospital. 3 other people in that car were seriously injured. I booked him in. His emotions were all over the place. I mean, he's blaming the whole world. Everybody else's fault. He shouldn't have to be there. The next minute, he's pleading with me. What am I going to do now? What have I done to this family? That made a lasting impression on me about drunk driving and traffic, and it really created the focus of my career in law enforcement. I continued on 34 years with the sheriff's office.
Was it his attitude that motivated you to feel, something's got to be done about that this person would?
That may have been a part of it. His attitude that he went out and drank and drove a second time after he already had a prior DWI.
Do you recall what his punishment was?
Oh, absolutely. He got sentenced to 5 years in jail. Actually, it was 5 one-year sentences to be served concurrently. And he got 1/3 good time. So he spent 8 months in the Oswego County Jail.
8? How does that work now? The 5? So he's serving them
All
concurrently.
at the same time. Concurrently. So if he appealed them, and he won appeal on 4 of them, he would still be serving the same amount of time on the other one. That's how concurrent works.
Okay, so that was a strategy by the DA who was.
Well, actually, the DA's hands are pretty tight on it because all the charges occurred from the same incident. So therefore, criminal procedure law requires that it has to be a consecutive. Concurrent would be if you went out and committed a crime and then went elsewhere and committed another crime, then the judge would have the option to sentence you concurrently, one after the other. But if all the offenses occurred at the same time, then it needs to be consecutive.
Okay, and can you give our viewers a little overview of what Stop DWI does today and what roles it have? I know they put on great conferences that I've attended, and that they have a wide range of subjects that they cover. Can you give us just an overview of what represents Stop DWI today?
Sure. Stop DWI is an acronym for Special Traffic Operations Program for Driving While Intoxicated. Our mission is to reduce or eliminate serious personal injury or fatal crashes from impaired drivers. Under the Vehicle and Traffic Law, we're to address 7 components in doing that. One of those is working with law enforcement, such as providing the proper tools, alka sensors, breathalyzers, so they can do a better job identifying impaired drivers and doing a better job so the district attorney's office can prosecute. Another section is probation. Probation after sentencing, foreseeing Oswego County purchases drug kits that can actually go back 72 hours. So if somebody comes in on a Monday, it can actually test whether they were drinking over the weekend so that they're more aware of that. We work with probation. We work with the courts on providing information and feedback on the law updates and procedures. We work with rehabilitation offenders. In Oswego County, we started a program called Project U-Turn, and anyone under the age of 21 that's charged with an alcohol offense must attend Project U-Turn. It's a 2-day program, about 6 hours long, and upon completion they get a certificate. They can take that certificate to the district attorney's office and discuss a possible plea bargain. If they don't complete the course, they don't get a certificate, there's no plea bargain. Either plead guilty as charged or take it to trial. Take your chances. Another big aspect of it is public education, public information.
Would that fall under the guise of your conferences? Is that considered?
It's more for the public, such as I'm very aggressive in getting into the middle school, high school health classes, driver education classes, community events where we can reach out to adults.
And impact them at a young age.
Absolutely. Well, not only the young age, but then repetitively as they're getting older. That's why we go to the colleges, we go to community events, and we really focus on hands-on activities so that it's not just me talking. I'm not trying to do a scare tactic. I'm providing some facts and information, and then I'm having them follow up with some hands-on experience with impairment goggles so they actually understand what I was talking about.
Is there a role for Stop DWI in crafting policies? Like, do you testify at hearings that are being held when they're considering bills for anti-DWI laws?
New York State Stop DWI actually has two divisions. We have the New York State Stop DWI Association, which I'm vice chair of, and we are a 501c3-4. So that means that we can use some of our funds towards lobbying efforts and educating lawmakers of upcoming laws and some statistics for them to better understand and decide how they're going to proceed with it. And then the New York State Stop DWI Foundation is a 501c3, and that has absolutely nothing to do with lobbying. That is strictly educational material promoting the cause across the state.
Has the uprise in opioids and prescription drugs, has that forced you to change your focus or to widen your platform in education?
It has caused me to in Oswego County because Oswego County has a major issue with opioids, overdoses, and deaths. I belong to the Oswego County Prevention Coalition, and we work with all 9 school districts, city BOCES, all law enforcement agencies. There's probably close to 30 agencies that are involved working together to better identify the issue and come up with solutions community-wide, both educating people and supporting those that are addicted.
What do you think the emphasis needs to be on in terms of trying to curb opioids? What do you think the resources are best placed to address that issue?
Probably education and support. People need to understand that an opioid tried once is an addiction, and that addiction stays with you for life. They can beat it, but it takes a lot, and they're going to be fighting it every day of their life. So people need to understand that before they get into it, and people need to understand that so that they're a stronger support group. Narcan's a prime example. You know, you hear the argument, why give them Narcan? Why is Narcan free when they chose to do that? Well, 75% of the people that are addicted to opioids started out with a prescription medication. They had an ailment, they had a cause that the doctor gave them a prescription. And for whatever reason, that transitioned into an addiction to an opioid, which would be heroin out in the street.
Right. There's so many cases where you hear about someone had a back injury, doctor prescribes them opioids, the prescription run out, and they felt they didn't need it anymore, but they weren't treating the pain, but they still had the addiction. So that, I think, would probably be a really component where education, letting people know ahead of time, if you have an injury, if you're going to be treating opioids, have a conversation with your physician about how to get out of it, how to maybe take something else that's not as addicting as those substances might be.
And I think the New York State Health Department has really stepped up on that with putting limitations on doctors on how much medication they can prescribe, for how long of a period, and how do you teach people to deal with their pain levels other than taking addictive medicines.
And one of the things I really enjoyed at the last conference Stop DWI put on in Lake Placid was they had Sergeant McDonald give a presentation on driverless cars, which I thought was fascinating. And he went into great detail of how how much attention is paid to it. He talked about one case in Arizona where there was a death in a driverless car, and it practically shut down the industry for 2 months. Where there's such fine detail, looking at every aspect of it, looking at every component of the technology to do that. I was really glad I interviewed him for our newsletter. Do you think the driverless car? His assertion was that this will be a game changer for road safety if we transition to driverless cars, because you're taking out the human error. What do you think driverless cars will mean for road safety in the future?
We still have Model Ts out there on the road.
Yeah.
Yes, driverless cars may have a role later in society. I think they have so much to work on the technology to make it safe and interactive. For you driving down the road to anticipate what that driver is going to do at the next intersection is one thing. To have a computer try and analyze that, I think is taking a different step. And I don't think we'll ever see the stage where that's all we have out there are driverless cars. Like I say, the Model T is out there. People enjoy driving their own old cars.
Yeah, I think that's actually the bigger hurdle, is that people want to have a sense of independence. They want to be in control of things.
And putting the two together, I think, is going to be the biggest obstacle that they have. If it was nothing but driverless cars out there, they would probably have a better chance of success than putting the human decision right next to the computer.
Right. Yes, I see what you're saying about that. He's also said at this part of his presentation that there's 5 levels of autonomy for the vehicles,
right,
to where they're operating totally independent of this, sometimes where the driver can switch over to a control to do that. He also said something that was very interesting, is that when they do start to implement this, the driver won't have to be licensed. It will just be registered to the owner, and all the insurance, because if he's not driving the car, then he wouldn't technically need to be licensed. So I think it was very exciting that he, said that it would be a game changer for road safety, and that it would, because 94% of all accidents are human error.
Right.
And I think that there's some other challenges that he may have to address with that. So what is on Stop DWI's agenda for this upcoming year?
We are striving to get ahead of the curve on marijuana and people driving while mobility impaired, drugs specifically with marijuana. More and more states are legalizing recreational marijuana. New York State has already legalized prescription medicine marijuana. And I don't think that people have a full concept of the ramifications of being high, as everybody tries to compare it to alcohol impairment. And alcohol impairment is based on blood alcohol content. It's pretty much consistent with all of us. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to marijuana, people display up to 5 different behaviors while they're high on it. And it's all over the board. You might exhibit 1 or 2. I might exhibit 1 or 2 different ones. Somebody else might exhibit their own or a combination of ours. It's all over the board.
So is that why it's so difficult to come up with a standard, because of what you just stated?
That, and it's a drug. So instead of BAC, it's measured in nanograms.
Right.
Colorado, for instance, when they passed it, they put a 5 nanogram limit on per se driving while mobility impaired marijuana. The problem with that is you might have 6 nanograms and look like you're doing okay. I might have 3 nanograms and I can't even function, because it affects all of our bodies so much differently. It is so much different than alcohol. And I really think that somebody needs more research on it so that we all have a better handle before we push on.
Take the plunge.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah. There's a company called Cannabix in California that has had developed a marijuana breathalyzer that measures the nanograms of it. But it's not any good if there's no standard for it. It's like you're having a breathalyzer, but there's no legal BAC.
Right. Well, with BAC, there's been an awful lot of research and study done on it, and finding the effects that each person consistently across the board will suffer at certain BAC levels. With marijuana, the nanograms doesn't do that. It's all over the board. So it's pretty hard to put a nanogram level on it and say, okay, this is a per se level. You can't drive higher than this.
Do you feel that that lawmakers in New York are taking you seriously and welcoming your advice and input to this? Because I know the whole process is so massive. Getting hearings, having studies examined, putting people on the record. I've been trying to pass the .05 bill for since like 2013, and I'm always hearing from even the chairman of the transportation chair is telling, from his staff is telling us that this marijuana issue is taking up all the oxygen, that there's no other consideration for this. And I can point to extrapolation of two major studies that prove that you would save 30 lives in New York, and I can't think of many bills where you get that kind of return. But do you feel that they're listening to you?
I do. It was part of the budget process, and it was pulled from that. It is still on their agenda through this session, which should end in June. But I think there's a lot of discussion to go on, and I think that they're receptive to that discussion. And let's actually take a serious look at this before we just jump into it.
Well, I have heard Governor Cuomo only say positive things about this. I haven't heard him address, maybe, I'm just seeing him, maybe he has, I just haven't seen what I see on TV. But I don't see that, I'm glad to hear that, because it seems like two things, that this is the only thing that we can deal with at the moment, and all I'm hearing is praise, for it'll raise tax revenue. So that was another.
And you're right. From what I've heard, the governor's office is still very, very proactive on getting this passed. And I would expect that sometime in the very near future, we're going to see it passed. What is passed? That is going to be the question.
And there's so many different elements, like edibles and different, like infused wine or infused liquids with marijuana. There's really a lot to consider, but I just hope that it's like you say, that they don't rush into it, that they take into account many factors that could be putting people at risk.
I'm not totally opposed to them passing some kind of legislation. All I'm asking is that somebody slow down enough and look at the consequences. And how do we educate a public about what true impairment is before we say, yeah, go ahead and do it, and then, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, well, we'll see. The session closed June 19th, so maybe we'll have an answer by then. So, looking at your impressive career, what has surprised you the most about what you've seen in road safety and the culture of drunk driving? Is there anything that stands out?
When I was on patrol in the 80s, Oswego County, average size county, we were making upwards of 1,000 DWI arrests a year. For the last 6 out of the last 7 years, our arrests have been below 500. Our crashes in the 80s, we were seeing 30-some traffic fatalities a year, and 20-some of those would be drug or alcohol related. Last 6 years, we're in the teens, maybe pushing 20 fatalities a year. And
in one county?
In one county.
Wow, that seems pretty high.
4 to 6 of those a year are drug or alcohol related. We're a smaller size county. When you look at Onondaga County, that their numbers have got to be 3 to 4 times our. They're a neighboring county. They've got Syracuse, and their numbers are probably 3 times ours.
Wow. Well, I guess we have a lot to be thankful for in Schenectady, because we have what's called a safety tree where we honor victims of drunk drivers, and there was 3, a grandmother, mother, and daughter, all from the same family, killed by he was drunk, but he was also on prescription drugs. But that, that happened in 2015, and we really should. You can't like hold a press conference and say no one died today, but it's really something to marvel at. And I guess I'll wind up by asking, are you optimistic about that we're going to continue to see the progress you've spoken of?
I think it's a long, protracted battle that we can see the numbers coming down, but I don't see a reality that we're going to totally eliminate it from our.
Oh, no, I
highways.
don't think anyone would suggest I mean, you always strive for perfection, but you're never gonna get there. But I guess, that I think that this marijuana issue will present a real challenge, and I'd be very interested to see, because there is this machine that's the marijuana breathalyzer, but I think it's a big question mark. I don't know. It could the accidents could skyrocket. I've seen the 4 states where they have legalized for recreational purposes. Those all had significant increases in crashes by impaired marijuana drivers.
Correct. Their fatality autopsy results are showing much higher numbers of people that have marijuana in their system.
But you must feel good about what you've contributed and the role you've played in.
Most of the time I do. And then we'll have that one crash, or we'll have that one DWI arrest, and you shake your head going, what have I got to do to get the message through? But then I turn around and you see students that you see on the street 2 or 3 years after the fact, and, hey, you were in my health class, have a plan. Now, not only do they recognize me, but they remember my motto, have a plan. So I know they're getting some kind of a message out of it. That's what makes it worth it.
Oh, that's good. Well, I'm glad you could come in today and
Thank
share
you.
us
Appreciate it.
your expertise on this. And like I say, the session ends June 19th, and I think we're going to see a bill before then. Whether it heeds the advice of experts like you, that remains to be seen.
I have drastically changed my education presentations, focusing a lot more on marijuana choices and consequences, so that people better understand that. Because you're right, I truly believe we're going to see a law passed. I just don't know what that law is going to read.
Okay, we'll see how that goes. Well, thank you for tuning in. If you would like to see this show or other past shows, you can go to our website, www.rid-usa.org, and you can see previous shows, and please leave us your comments. Until then, we'll be looking down the road.